Let's not waste any time and get straight to it. For the Baron lane we have the carry tier, and here we have Camille in the Super SS Plus tier. Camille is the most broken champion in the game thanks to Divine Sundra and Hullbreaker. Her damage potential, especially into other champions such as On, who is one of the most broken tanks currently, is just obnoxious. Her lockdown with ultimate, her trading pattern in lane, and everything she has to offer is just way too overtuned. Other champions in the S tier feature similar strength, but just can't be the same. For example, Jax, Riven, Wukong, Yone, Akali and Gwen feature different things of the game. Both Gwen and Akali are not really infamous for her laning prowess. Compared to them, Jax, Riven, Wukong and Yone are way more powerful when it comes to getting early lane leads. With that in mind, they can snowball the game from early on and then take over the game. However, if Gwen or Akali get into the later stages of the game, especially with the nerfed Hullbreaker, they can really make the difference. Champions in the lower tiers like the A tier are just very conditional, and B tier champions are supposed to be, well, just stay away from them. For the best tank in the Baron lane we have Ornn. This champion scales the best and has the best impact on the game. His ultimate power, his brittle combo, and overall his tankiness are just way too powerful for any other champion in that same tier. Garen doesn't come close, Shen doesn't come close, Mundo doesn't come close, and San also doesn't come close. Literally nothing comes close. And into other champions like Camille and Jax, he just gets absolutely ran over. However, there's one certain champion in the tank tier that's very good against Ornn, it's Narcissus. This champion scales very brutally into the later stages of the game and forces Ornn to build anti-healing. And if he doesn't do so, especially with the Divine Sundra or Narcissus, the Narcissus will just take over and infinitely scales into the later stages of the game. Nonetheless, Narcissus doesn't even closely compete with Ornn's power, and there's nothing Narcissus can do compared to Ornn apart from split push. For the jungle, we have Kayn as the most broken champion in the game. Blue Kayn, especially with the Shimmering Spark tech, which allows you to get your form super fast, as damage you deal doesn't matter how much it is, as long as you deal damage, will grant you your form earlier. Once you get your blue form, even if you're 0-4, 0-5, it doesn't really matter, you'll take over the game. Manamune, Numa's Ghostblade, Essence Reaver, and all of these items make it very difficult for you to be punished. In addition to that, your champion is impossible to be caught. You hide in walls constantly, and all you do is press your second ability on cooldown to take down enemies. And you can even ult them from Narnia and go back to Namibia South. Like, there's no way you can get caught unless you want to be caught. And all the other champions below feature similarities. For example, every AP champion below in the S tier features snowball potential in the early game to then snowball the game brutally in the mid to late game. They have the greatest one-shot potential and destroy anything in their way almost instantaneously. The only AD champion that comes remotely close is Kha'Zix in that sentiment. However, bruiser champions are obviously more tankier and therefore allow you to make more mistakes, and then in the later stages of the game you'll turn into a beefy boy. However, the AP champions have it infinitely easier to carry compared to AD champions, with the exception obviously of Kayn and Hybrid Kai'Sa. For the tank tier, it's still Rammus, because we're still in an AD carry heavy meta, and therefore this champion becomes the most broken champion. Even his early game is very powerful if you fight other champions when you start with a cloth armor. Just taunting them and proccing your aftershock and forcing them to attack you with your second ability will show you that even a Lee Sin is actually losing 1v1 against you unless you place it perfectly. All other champions below, like Volibear, Shen and Nautilus, are worse compared to Rammus, but Shen is an exception here. As Shen is able to assist the AD carrier all over the map, he's quite a powerful pick. Anything below is substantially weaker, with the exception of maybe Amumu and Nunu. Amumu might go into the AP route and carry the game by either soloing Nasha or one-tapping the enemy team, and Nunu is just an annoying piece of, you know what I want to say. For the mid lane we have a few changes. For the mage tier we go for non-committal champions. In the super broken tier we have Orianna as the most non-committal champion in the game. She farms from range, scales safely and takes over the game, which is very powerful against AD carries because she can play from range, a higher range than they have. Similar to this, we have Zoe as a playmaking champion, which is a very high laning phase because she wins most of her lanes. And after this we have the newly buffed Lux, broken as heck champion and just way too powerful. And as a trick, use your E into the wave and then Q it, because as a consequence, your Q will proc the passive mark and then you'll kill the wave. The way around it doesn't work. Another champion that is similar to this in terms of power is Veigar. He is very powerful against AD carries because he literally one-taps them. He doesn't really care about their shield bar or anything, they don't even get into exhaust range. Any cage he places, he just immediately destroys anything in his way. All the other champions in the lower tiers are more committal or just don't feature as much damage. An exception here could be made for Ziggs, but it's still Ziggs. He doesn't feature much of a laning phase and his scaling is very powerful, but it's not really the same as for the other champions. He is more of an AoE wiper than a single target nuker. For the assassins we have Zed. With the buffed lethality items and overall the game pace in League of Legends WildRift, he is just one of the pinnacle champions. His damage potential is very high and his roam ability is just unmatched. Any of the mages he's facing can't really do too much to him. He might suffer in the early levels, but after that he's unleashed. If they choose to follow him into the fog of war, he will immediately kill them. Champions in the lower tier, for example the S tier, feature similar strength, but obviously not to that extent. Katarina has barely to no laning presence unless the enemy makes a mistake. Diana on the other hand has more laning presence as she's very potent with quick trades starting with level 2 or level 3, but it takes a lot of time to get there. Akali is not doing anything unless she's running Electrocute and hits it with her third ability, and Pyke is just being Pyke. He just runs around the map and makes things work. Ahri and anything below are just slowly scaling champions that don't feature enough damage or just take too much time to get anything done, and comparatively to the mage tier they just don't do anything. For the other tier we have Jace as the strongest champion in the game. His Mana-immune spike and going towards Essence Reaver make him very powerful in the sense that just one combo takes away half of the enemy's HP bar. Especially the fact that he's able to go Serpent's Fang makes him so much more powerful when it comes to dealing with AD carries. Champions below, for example Lucian and Akshan, feel substantially weaker than before, however they still feature early game presence which allows them to snowball games. Depending on how long the game goes though, they'll fall off really low and are even worse than some B tier champions. But given the fact that you're picking these to snowball the game, they're still very powerful in their niche and you need to just be very aware of what you're doing. If you pick them into scaling champions that can stall the game, then you'll be in for a very bad ride, because even if you're 10-0 you will not get anything done. And the champions in the A and B tier are just way too conditional compared to the other champions. Picking these requires you to know about the matchups, and if you don't, you're in for a very bad time. However, Corki and Jhin, for example in the S tier, can be picked almost blind as they're able to neutralize all laning phases and even carry depending on the enemy's mistakes. For the AD carry tier we have Jhin. Jhin is the most potent AD carry depending on being on weak side or strong side, it just doesn't really matter to be honest. He wins lane, he can deny lane, he can neutralize lane, and he can be set up, he can be anything you want him to be, as long as you don't build shit Collector. And I literally mean this, Collector is a bad item, it just makes you feel good and you actually deal less damage. And here's why. If you're allowed to hit one more time with a tankier build, you will obviously deal more damage than for example dealing 3% more damage with Collector. If you're allowed to survive more rotations, then you'll deal far more damage. So let's pretend you live for 10 seconds with one build, but for 15 with the other one. Obviously you can map out mentally how much more damage you deal in the 15 seconds compared to the 10 seconds. Other champions in the S tier scale similarly as well, but are simply not as powerful. Champions however that for example can stall lane on their own, for example Corki and Ezreal or Varus, are very powerful. Another champion that could be in the S tier usually would be Varus, but considering it's a solo queue environment I just wouldn't put him there. Thematically speaking and strength-wise speaking, he is an S tier champion though. For the mage tier we have Lux. Lux is overbuffed and way too powerful. There's simply no reason to not just insta-lock this champion and be done with your day. It requires no skill and all you have to do is press your second ability on cooldown, you're done with it. All the other champions below, for example Seraphine, feature team-wide wipe, same for Ziggs, and it's just very powerful. However, more committal champions like Vex are, yes they're very strong, but I still wouldn't go for them. Another champion that could be arguably in the S tier would be Orianna, but for the AD carry role I think she takes a little bit too long time because of her less of XP and gold gain compared to the mid lane, but I don't know about this yet, but you can also just put her S tier to be honest. For the supports we have the Engage God Rakan. This champion presses one ability into the entire team and you're dead. And it's very difficult to avoid this because flashing in this ability is just way too powerful. And you can't do too much against it unless you have very fast fingers and good awareness. You just end the fight immediately. Other champions in the lower tiers, for example Gragas and Nautilus, do something similar but not nearly as fast. And Thresh and Galio are just very annoying to face. Other champions in the lower tiers do something similar but just worse, so everything in the Engage tier does something similar as an Engage, but if you go down from the highest to the lowest tier, you'll understand that each champion in the lower tier does the job from the higher tier, just worse. The same goes for the support champions and the protect tier. Lux is the pinnacle of those champions because it requires no skill. You start with your second ability and max it first ASAP. Then you just spam it during fights and nothing can happen to you. Even Serpent's Fang isn't enough. Champions below this tier are doing something similar or something close to this, but just not nearly as good. For example, Karma deals good poke damage, Lulu enforces or empowers your AD carry, Soraka heals you, Braum shields you, and Janna shields you and buffs your AD carry as well. But nothing comes close to what Lux provides. It's just too much shielding and too much damage at the same time. Something that gets close to this, however, would be Janna, because her AD scaling on the third ability that she grants to ADs makes them really powerful, but it's still not enough to get through Lux shielding. And champions in the lower tier below are just doing nothing in comparison. For example, Sona and Morgana are literally useless compared to champions in the S tier or higher, and Sona only survives lane if you are a bad player. Sona dies. I've played against many Sonas, if not all Sonas, top 1, top 2, top 3, it doesn't matter. You kill them level 1, level 2, level 3, especially if you see them run Sickle. They just die. And whoever tells you something else plays absolutely different games in whatever elo they're in, but trust me, if you're in Challenger or Legend, these champions are absolute meme material. And if you want to carry in the Dragon lane, then just pick up Pyke. Pyke is the most powerful roaming champion in the game that takes over fights and games completely on his own. Just one hook into one ult reset and the entire game is over. He gets so much gold, is super annoying, and it's so difficult to face him. And here's a trick. If you know that there's a ward on the map, you can use your second ability to just walk through that ward and give the enemy a false sense of security. With that happening, you make it yourself so much easier to catch people off guard. Another powerful pick is Senna. Running Senna with Krakenslayer Brutal is just so crazy. You auto-attack, use your first ability in auto-attack, you just deal absolute insane amounts of damage. And everything below this tier just does everything less good and just deals less damage. Senna scales brutal into the late game, Pyke scales brutal into the late game, and other champions take too long, are too vulnerable to do the same thing. If you fancy Ashe, you can for example play Ashe and play off ults all the time, but you might as well play Brand into just melee heavy compositions. And the same goes for Swain. All the other champions in the higher tier are just way more blindable, you can basically pick them any game you want. But Brand, Swain and Ashe are very much more niche. And that's it for today's video. Thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed the video leave a like and subscribe to the channel.